A woman without her life partner is not a silhouette missing its shadow, nor is she an incomplete verse waiting for someone else's rhythm to give her meaning. She is whole in ways the world often forgets to see. She stands in the doorway of her own becoming, learning that her breath, her stride, her voice, and her truth were never meant to be measured by who walks beside her. She learns that loneliness is not the monster she feared, and solitude is not the punishment she was taught to dread. Solitude becomes a room where she returns to herself and finds that she never needed permission to rise. There is a quiet kind of courage in walking this earth without a hand to intertwine fingers with, without a shoulder promised to stay, without a body that vows to be a home. Many people imagine her wandering through days searching for something she has lost. But what they don't understand is that she is often discovering things she never knew existed within her. She is not waiting. She is witnessing. She is collecting the small proofs of her own resilience like seashells, each one shaped by a tide that tried to pull her under. And each time the tide returned her to shore, she learned that survival had already chosen her. A woman who stands alone hears the world differently. She notices the rustling of her own thoughts, the trembling truth inside her chest, the heartbeat that has carried her through storms. She learns to dance with her own shadow and sit with her own silence. She learns to become the friend she once searched for in others. She becomes the keeper of her own secrets, the architect of her own healing, the witness to her own transformation. There is a kind of tenderness that blooms only when she realizes she can hold herself. The world had taught her that companionship was the reward for being gentle, but she discovers that gentleness is a reward she can give herself. She wraps her arms around her own tired spirit and whispers that she has done well, even when no one else is there to say it. And that whisper becomes the loudest anthem her soul has ever heard. She remembers the nights when she feared the emptiness of her bed, when she believed that the absence of another heartbeat meant she was somehow lacking. But over time, she discovers that the expansion of space beside her is not a hollow echo but a sanctuary she fills with her breath, her dreams, her stories. She lies in that space and realizes she has room to stretch, room to grow, room to place every piece of herself without shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. The bed is not empty. It is hers, and that truth becomes sacred. A woman without her life partner learns the language of independence in ways that cannot be taught, only lived. She learns to make decisions without searching for approval, to trust her own instincts when the world tries to shake her certainty. She goes to the grocery store alone, not because she must, but because she can. She laughs at jokes she tells herself. She drives through long roads with music loud enough to drown out the doubts that once told her she needed someone else to make the journey worthwhile. She explores new places and realizes her feet can travel distances she once felt too fragile to attempt. She is not cold. She is not unloving. She is simply aware of her own worth in a way that can no longer be fractured by absence. She understands that love, when it arrives, should add to her life and not fill a vacancy. She will not build a home around a void and call it devotion. She will build a home within herself first, strong enough to welcome another soul, but never dependent on it. She does not close her heart. She simply refuses to hand it to someone who brings only promises instead of presence. People look at her and wonder how she moves with such steadiness. They do not see the 1,000 moments she stitched herself back together. They do not see the morning she woke with tears on her cheeks, but still rose. They do not see the nights when she traced her scars and told them they were allowed to stay. They do not see the battles she fought in silence, the negotiations she made with her spirit, the prayers she whispered into the dark asking for strength to continue. They do not see her forgiveness. They do not see her grief. They do not see her courage. But these unseen pieces form the mosaic of her becoming. She knows what it means to carry memories that ache. She knows what it means to love deeply and lose painfully. She knows what it means to smile at a world that misreads her expression, assuming she is bitter or broken simply because she chooses herself. But she is neither. She is blooming. Her petals may open slowly, but they open with intention. She is learning that a heart can be whole even after it has been shattered, just as the sky remains vast even after the sun has set. A woman walking this life alone develops a particular strength, quiet, dignified, unshakable. It is not the strength of hardness, but the strength of softness. She learns that softness can survive storms. Softness can bend and not break. Softness can hold memories without letting them overwhelm her. She learns to breathe through her pain until her breath becomes a gentle wind pushing her forward. She learns that tears are not evidence of weakness. They are the body's way of admitting that it feels deeply and heals honestly. When she stands before a mirror, she does not search for flaws or inadequacies. She looks into her own eyes and sees a woman who has endured, a woman who has loved, a woman who has grown, a woman who has earned every line written across her face by experience. She sees a woman who has walked through darkness and still carries light. A woman who can give love without losing herself. A woman who can walk away when staying would mean forgetting her own worth. She discovers that life is not a story waiting for a romantic chapter to save it. Life is the accumulation of moments she shapes with her own hands. Life is the laughter she creates with her own joy. Life is the peace she cultivates after letting go of what once hurt her. Life is the wisdom she gathers from every fall, every rise, every heartbeat. She is not defined by who stands beside her, but by the grace with which she stands alone. The world may try to tell her that a woman alone is a woman lacking, but she knows better. She knows that a woman alone can be a mountain. She can be a river. She can be a fire that refuses to be extinguished. She can be a garden growing from cracks in the concrete. She can be a sky that stretches endlessly. She can be all of these things without needing anyone to validate her existence. But do not misunderstand her strength. It is not born from disinterest in love. It is born from understanding that love must be chosen wisely. She refuses to hand her heart to someone who treats it like a temporary possession. She refuses to dim her spirit to make someone else feel brighter. She refuses to carry the weight of a relationship built on imbalance. She refuses to participate in her own diminishing. When love arrives, if it arrives, it will find her whole. It will find her rooted. It will find her unafraid of solitude and untempted by mediocrity. It will find her not searching for someone to complete her, but searching for someone who can walk beside her, without stepping on her dreams. She will not settle for companionship that asks her to shrink. She will not bend herself into shapes that make someone else more comfortable. She will stand tall as she always has, and love will have to rise to meet her. She has learned to treasure her peace. Peace is her inheritance, her sanctuary, her home. Peace is what she fought for through tears that soaked her pillow and nights when silence felt loud enough to crush her. Peace is what she earned by releasing people who loved her only halfway. Peace is what she chooses every morning when she wakes up and reminds herself that she deserves softness, honesty, presence, reciprocity. She holds on to that peace with both hands, and she protects it like a sacred flame. She knows now that the measure of her life is not taken by whether someone else stands beside her. It is taken by how deeply she honors herself, how bravely she rises after falling, how fiercely she protects her heart, how gently she speaks to her soul, how freely she dreams without waiting for permission, how boldly she walks into rooms that once intimidated her, how confidently she occupies the space she once thought she had to earn. There is a power in her that the world cannot define. It glows quietly. It does not boast. It simply exists, steady and unbothered. This power does not come from proving herself to others. It comes from knowing herself, trusting herself, and returning to herself repeatedly. It comes from embracing her imperfections and loving the woman she is becoming. It comes from understanding that she is not alone because she lacks, but because she chooses to stand in truth rather than in a partnership that would ask her to pretend. When she laughs, the sound carries freedom. When she cries, the tears cleanse her spirit. When she speaks, her voice carries the wisdom of every moment she learned to rely on herself. When she prays, her prayers rise with sincerity. When she walks with purpose. When she rests without asking permission. When she dreams boldly. A woman without her life partner becomes a storyteller. She carries stories in her bones, stories of heartbreak and healing, disappointment and discovery, endings and beginnings. She learns to tell those stories with grace, not because she needs sympathy, but because she understands that her journey might light the way for someone else. She knows that vulnerability is not weakness. It is the courage to show the world that she is still here, still standing, still hoping, still living. And she does hope. Hope sits quietly in her chest, not as a desperate wish for someone to arrive, but as a steady belief that life still has sweetness to offer. She hopes for mornings filled with sunshine on her face. She hopes for nights where she feels the tenderness of her own heart. She hopes for laughter that shakes the loneliness from her skin. She hopes for a tomorrow where she continues to grow into herself. Hope is not something she searches for in another person. Hope is something she breathes. She does not deny that there are moments when she aches, moments when she wishes for another soul to share her joys and her sorrows, moments when her heart feels heavy with memories of what once was or what could have been. But she learns to allow the ache without letting it steer her. She understands that longing does not make her weak. Longing makes her human, and humanity is something she embraces without shame. There is a truth she carries with her. Being alone is not the same as being abandoned. Being alone is not the same as being unloved. Being alone is not the same as being forgotten. Being alone can be a declaration that she is choosing herself, honoring herself, and refusing to settle for anything less than she deserves. Alone can be a place of safety, a place of rebirth, a place of reflection. Alone can be a place where she meets herself again and again until she recognizes the woman she has always been meant to be. And when she recognizes herself, she sees a woman of depth, a woman of fire, a woman of wisdom born from pain, a woman of tenderness born from survival, a woman of compassion born from struggles she overcame. She sees a woman capable of extraordinary love, not because she needs to give it to someone else, but because she has learned to give it to herself. A woman without her life partner learns that she is allowed to take up space. She is allowed to be bold. She is allowed to be loud. She is allowed to speak truths that others fear. She is allowed to set boundaries that protect her heart. She is allowed to walk away from what endangers her peace. She is allowed to celebrate her victories without minimizing them to make others comfortable. She is allowed to exist fully, deeply, unapologetically. The world may look at her and wonder how she does it. But the truth is simple. She does it because she must. She does it because she chooses to. She does it because she refuses to surrender her life to the absence of someone who was never meant to define her. She does it because she has seen what she is capable of. She does it because she has learned that her strength was never dependent on anyone else's presence. She does it because standing alone taught her more about herself than she ever learned in the arms of someone else. She has become a testament to resilience. A proof that a woman can lose what she once held dear and still rise with dignity. A reminder that life does not always unfold the way we wish, but it unfolds in the ways we need. She is evidence that a woman can carry both sorrow and hope without breaking, that she can stand alone and still be surrounded by love, the love she gives herself, the love she receives from the universe, the love that finds her when she least expects it. And through all of this, she understands that her journey is far from over. She does not measure her future by whether someone will join her. She measures it by how brightly she will shine, how deeply she will grow, how boldly she will live. She measures it by the lengths she will travel in her healing, the heights she will reach in her becoming, and the depths she will explore within her own soul. She measures it by the love she will continue to cultivate for the woman she is, and the woman she is becoming. A woman without her life partner is not waiting for her story to begin. Her story is already unfolding in every breath she takes, every step she makes, every truth she claims. She is the heroine of her own narrative. She is the author of her own destiny. She is the guardian of her own heart. And she will continue to rise not because she is alone, but because she is powerful. She is not searching for completion. She is searching for alignment. She is searching for authenticity. She is searching for peace. And she finds it again and again in herself. This is her life. This is her journey. This is her rising. Freedom becomes her second skin when she stops apologizing for standing alone. Because something shifts inside her the moment she realizes she no longer owes the world an explanation for her existence. She begins to understand that standing alone is not a crime, nor is it a confession of inadequacy. It is simply a declaration that she has learned to walk with the rhythm of her own heartbeat. She moves through her days with a quiet assurance, knowing that she does not need to shrink to make others comfortable, nor soften her edges to fit someone else's frame. Her steps become more certain, her breath becomes steadier, and her voice grows stronger as she embraces the truth that freedom is not granted by companionship or validation, but discovered within the chambers of her own soul. Slowly, she unlearns the habit of stepping aside for others to pass. She stops offering explanations for the choices that protect her peace. She no longer rehearses apologies for wanting space, silence, clarity, or distance. She realizes she does not need permission to rest, to dream, to say no, to walk away, or to stand exactly where she is. The world around her tries to tell her that independence is arrogance, that solitude is stubbornness, that self-respect is unforgiving. But she learns to listen instead to the soft truth rising inside her. She is allowed to live for herself. She begins peeling away the old layers, the layers woven from expectations, judgments, and the opinions that once shaped her choices. She takes off the garments of guilt she wore for desiring freedom. She sheds the cloak of fear that once convinced her she could not survive without someone to lean on. She removes the mask she wore to appear agreeable, even when her heart begged her to speak her truth. With each layer she lets fall, her skin becomes lighter, her spirit breathes easier, and a new kind of freedom begins to cling to her like a familiar warmth. She discovers that standing alone is not an act of rebellion, but an act of reclamation. She reclaims her time, her dreams, her boundaries, her needs. She no longer blurts out apologies automatically when she expresses her feelings or asserts her limits. She asks herself why she ever believed she was obligated to apologize for wanting peace or seeking clarity. She wonders how many times she stayed silent because she feared disappointing someone who never took the time to understand her. She wonders how often she abandoned herself to keep a fragile harmony that never included her happiness. The questions sting, but they awaken her to her own worth. As she moves through the world with her newfound independence, people begin to notice the shift. Some admire her strength, others misunderstand it, and a few may feel threatened by it. But she does not let their reactions dictate her direction. She is no longer shaped by the expectations of those who view solitude as sadness or self-reliance as coldness. She knows that those who do not understand her path are not meant to walk it with her. She knows that those who expect her to apologize for choosing herself are revealing their discomfort, not her wrongdoing. She keeps moving with grace, letting their misunderstandings fall from her like dust. Her confidence grows in small moments, when she makes decisions without second-guessing herself, when she goes places alone and feels comfortable, when she fills a room with her presence, even if no one else stands beside her. She begins to cherish her independence not as a shield, but as a home. It becomes the ground on which she plants the seeds of her future. It becomes the air she breathes when the world feels heavy. It becomes the melody she hums when her spirit needs reassurance. She no longer chases acceptance. She no longer fears being misunderstood. She no longer measures her value by whether others approve of her solitude. Freedom becomes her second skin, because she wears it effortlessly, not as something she performs, but as something she embodies. It does not demand attention. It does not shout. It simply radiates from her, subtle yet undeniable. It is in the way she lifts her head while walking through rooms she once tiptoed through. It is in the way she pauses before saying yes, checking whether her spirit truly agrees. It is in the way she protects her boundaries with serenity instead of apologies. It is in the way she no longer bends herself into shapes that betray her truth. She begins to trust herself in ways she never did before. She becomes her own counsel, her own comfort, her own guide. She learns to hold her own hand through fear, to steady her own breath during uncertainty, to remind herself of her strength during moments of doubt. She learns to sit with her emotions without feeling ashamed, allowing them to rise and fall like waves without immediately searching for someone to anchor her. In standing alone, she discovers she is not alone at all. She is accompanied by the resilience that has lived inside her all along. Each day, she becomes more fluent in the language of self-respect. She chooses connections that honor her growth. She walks away from those who ask her to shrink. She welcomes people who value her independence, people who do not see her freedom as a threat, but as a truth she has earned. She no longer hides parts of herself to fit into narrow spaces. She no longer fears that embracing her freedom will create distance. She knows the right people are drawn to the light of authenticity, not the shadow of compliance. She begins to live with a fullness that no longer depends on the presence or absence of another person. She fills her days with meaning that comes from her own choices. She cherishes the quiet moments that once frightened her. She enjoys solitude without feeling judged by it. She lets her dreams take shape without waiting for external approval. Her independence does not isolate her. It elevates her. It opens doors inside herself that she once believed were locked. Her freedom no longer feels like something she must protect fiercely or defend constantly. It becomes natural, like a breath she doesn't realize she's taking. It settles into her spirit until she can no longer imagine living without it. She understands that freedom is not the absence of connection, but the presence of self. It allows her to love without losing herself. It allows her to give without depleting her spirit. It allows her to stand alone without being lonely. Freedom becomes her second skin the moment she stops apologizing for the space she occupies, the choices she makes, the boundaries she sets, the dreams she chases, the voice she uses, the life she builds, the woman she becomes. She realizes that her worth has never depended on someone else's presence or absence. And this realization arrives not like a loud declaration, but like a quiet awakening inside her spirit. It begins with small shifts, almost unnoticed at first. Moments where she catches herself adjusting her value in response to how others treat her. Moments where she recognizes the old patterns where she measured her importance by who stayed, who left, or who noticed her at all. She starts to see clearly that she has spent too long believing that her worth hangs on the fragile threads of validation, affection, approval, or attention from people who themselves were unsure of their own value. This clarity grows slowly but steadily, illuminating corners of her spirit she once kept hidden out of fear that they were not enough. She starts to observe her own thoughts, how often she minimizes her strengths, how often she apologizes for her needs, how often she bends herself to fit into the small spaces others offer her. She wonders how many times she lowered her voice so someone else's could feel louder, how often she carried emotional weight that was never hers to bear, how often she blamed herself for absences she did not cause. She realizes that in those moments, she handed her worth to others like something fragile they could shape, break, or ignore. And now she begins to reclaim it piece by piece, breath by breath, moment by moment. She sees her own worth reflected not in external validation, but in the resilience that kept her moving even when she felt unseen. She sees it in the tenderness she offers herself when no one else knows she is hurting. She sees it in the dreams she continues to hold, the courage she continues to summon, the compassion she continues to extend to a world that did not always return it. Her worth lives in the quiet persistence of her spirit, not in whether anyone else recognizes it. She learns that presence can be comforting, but it cannot define her value. She learns that absence can be painful, but it cannot diminish her dignity. She refuses to believe that someone's inability to stay means she was unworthy of staying for. She refuses to let the departures of others dictate how she views herself. She begins to understand that people leave for reasons that have nothing to do with her, reasons rooted in their own fears, limitations, or unreadiness. Their absence is not a reflection of her worthiness, but of their own capacity. She starts to look back at the moments where she felt abandoned or overlooked and sees them differently. She no longer asks what was wrong with her, but what was wrong with the way she was taught to measure her own value. She begins to see that she was never incomplete, never insufficient, never lacking. The world simply told her to search for her worth in places it did not exist. So now she pulls her worth back into herself like a woman gathering scattered pieces of her soul and placing them gently in her own hands. As she grows into this understanding, her posture changes. She stands a little taller, not with arrogance, but with awareness. She carries herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knows they no longer need to prove themselves. Her heartbeat steadies, her breath deepens, her presence becomes grounded. She no longer needs to earn love by diminishing herself or earn respect by contorting her truth. She knows now that her worth is not negotiable, not conditional, not dependent on whether anyone chooses her or not. She starts to speak differently, too. Her voice carries certainty rather than hesitation. She uses words that honor her truth rather than dilute it. She says yes with intention and no with confidence. She no longer explains her boundaries as if they are inconveniences. She no longer apologizes for expecting reciprocity. She no longer whispers her needs as though they are burdens. She understands that her voice has always held power, and now she speaks from the fullness of her own worth, not the emptiness of her doubts. In her quiet moments, she reflects on the relationships she has experienced, the ones that uplifted her, the ones that drained her, the ones that taught her, the ones that bruised her. She realizes that even in her worst moments, her worth never changed. It was her perception of it that wavered. Now she can separate the two. She can say to herself with honesty that she deserved better even when she accepted less. She can acknowledge the pain without letting it rewrite her identity. She can look at the past not as evidence of her inadequacy, but as proof of her survival. She approaches her future differently now. She no longer fears being alone because she no longer believes solitude means she is unwanted. She no longer clings to relationships out of fear of losing value if she walks away. She no longer tolerates treatment that contradicts her truth. Instead, she builds connections rooted in mutual respect, tenderness, honesty, and emotional maturity. She seeks depth rather than attention, presence rather than proximity, consistency rather than vague affection. She knows that the right people will never make her question her worth. They will reflect it back to her. As she grows, she becomes more selective, not out of coldness, but out of clarity. She understands that not everyone deserves access to her heart, her energy, or her time. She realizes that her worth is reflected in the standards she holds, the boundaries she sets, the people she allows to stay, and the people she is willing to release. She no longer feels guilty for letting go of those who drain her spirit or diminish her value. She understands now that protecting her peace is an act of self-respect. In her reflection, she sees that her worth is woven into the very fabric of her existence. It lives in her kindness, her strength, her softness, her wisdom, her laughter, her endurance, her dreams. It lives in her scars and in her healing. It lives in her failures and in her victories. It lives in the way she rises again and again. It has lived within her since the beginning, untouched by any presence, untouched by any absence. The more she embraces this truth, the more radiant she becomes. Not in a way that demands attention, but in a way that quietly commands it. Her presence becomes a steady glow instead of a flickering flame. She no longer fears being misunderstood, undervalued, or overlooked. She knows that those who are meant to see her will see her clearly, and those who are not are simply not part of her path. She releases the need to be chosen, because she has finally chosen herself. And in choosing herself, she discovers that worth is not something she must seek, earn, chase, or prove. It is something she embodies. It is something she carries. It is something she is. Her journey becomes a testimony that a woman can rise, flourish, and shine without needing to be completed by anyone. And this truth unfolds slowly within her, like a dawn that takes its time to paint the sky. She begins to understand that everything she once looked for outside herself, validation, recognition, perfection, completion, was never meant to be borrowed from another soul. It was meant to be uncovered within her own. Her steps through the world start to reflect this quiet revelation. She walks differently, not with arrogance, but with a calm sense of belonging to herself. Her shoulders relax, her breath steadies, her eyes soften, and her presence becomes fuller, richer, more grounded. She is learning that her life is not a waiting room where she must stand still until someone arrives to give her permission to move. Her life is a field she was born to explore, cultivate, and claim. She grows into this knowing through moments both soft and sharp. She rises after disappointments she thought would break her. She rebuilds herself after seasons where she felt hollow. She learns to sit with her grief without letting it swallow her. She learns to embrace her joy without guilt. She discovers that she can hold contradictions, strength and vulnerability, hope and fear, love and loss, and still remain whole. Her wholeness does not depend on being unscarred. It comes from the way she tends to the scars with tenderness, the way she allows them to remind her of her endurance instead of her pain. She understands now that she is the keeper of her own healing, and with that realization comes a new sense of power. As she grows, she starts to release the narratives she had inherited or absorbed, the narratives that whisper to her that a woman alone is incomplete, that her value is measured by who chooses her, that her life is awaiting approval or partnership to become meaningful. She sees how deeply those ideas had shaped her choices and shadows, how often she had dimmed her voice to fit into them, how often she had doubted her own worth because of them. And now she begins the slow, intentional work of rewriting those stories. Each act of self-respect becomes a new sentence. Each boundary she honors becomes a paragraph. Each step toward her truth becomes a chapter. She writes her life not with ink but with courage. She starts to invest deeply in the woman she is becoming. She feeds her mind with ideas that stretch her. She nurtures her spirit with moments of quiet and reflection. She strengthens her voice by speaking her truth, even when it trembles. She learns to trust her intuition, the quiet whisper that always knew which paths were hers and which ones she forced herself down. She begins choosing with clarity rather than fear, with wisdom rather than desperation, with dignity rather than doubt. Her growth becomes intentional instead of accidental. She no longer waits for someone else to hand her a future worth living. She builds one with her own hands. She learns to take up space, not just physically but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. She allows herself to occupy the fullness of her being without shrinking her desires or softening her dreams. She realizes that she has a right to want more, to expect more, to become more. Her ambition is not too much. Her heart is not too sensitive. Her needs are not too heavy. She holds all of herself with both firmness and gentleness, refusing to abandon any part of her identity simply to make others more comfortable. The more she embraces herself, the more she glows from within. In her solitude, she finds sacredness where she once found fear. Silence becomes not an emptiness but a canvas on which her true thoughts can speak. She discovers the beauty of listening to herself, truly listening without judgment, without interruption, without rushing to silence her own doubts or discomforts. She allows herself to breathe in her own presence, and she begins to understand that this companionship with herself is not a consolation prize. It is a relationship she has long neglected, one that holds the power to transform her life from the inside out. She becomes her own safe place, her own steady ground, her own source of comfort and clarity. She learns to honor the cycles of her growth. When she blooms, she celebrates the expansion. When she wilts, she grants herself grace. When she falls, she rises without shame. When she feels lost, she trusts that she will find her way back. She stops rushing her healing. She stops forcing herself to be strong when she needs softness. She stops apologizing for outgrowing people, places, and versions of herself that no longer align with her truth. Each season of her life becomes a teacher, not a failure. As she evolves, the world around her begins to notice, not because she demands attention, but because she radiates a kind of self-assuredness that cannot be imitated. People see a woman who is not looking for completion, a woman who knows she is already whole. Some are drawn to her light, others are intimidated by it. But she no longer dims herself to manage anyone's reaction. She understands now that her light is not meant to be hidden, but to guide her forward step by step. She becomes more selective with the people she allows into her life. Her standards rise, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. She seeks relationships, romantic, platonic, and familial, that honor her growth, respect her independence, and nurture her spirit. She no longer attaches herself to those who only take from her. She no longer entertains those who treat her heart carelessly. She no longer invests in those who require her to shrink, silence herself, or sacrifice her peace. She knows she deserves reciprocity, tenderness, honesty, and emotional maturity, and she refuses to settle for anything less. She begins to discover joy in the smallest moments. The warmth of sunlight on her skin, the silence of early mornings, the satisfaction of accomplishing something she once feared, the laughter that escapes her unexpectedly, the pride she feels when she reflects on how far she has come. She understands now that joy does not need permission. Joy does not need an audience. Joy does not require another person to hold it. Joy can simply be hers freely and fully. She learns to dream again, but this time the dreams are hers alone, not dreams of being chosen, not dreams of being saved, not dreams of being completed by someone else. These are dreams rooted in her own desires, her own gifts, her own potential. She envisions a future where she stands in the fullness of her being, where she gives and receives love without losing herself, where she moves through the world with grace and authority, where she chooses her life rather than waiting for it to be chosen for her. Her journey, with all its twists and triumphs, becomes an example to others, even if she never sets out to be one. She becomes living proof that a woman's identity is not defined by who walks beside her, but by the strength, wisdom, resilience, and softness she discovers within herself. Her life becomes an illustration of what happens when a woman chooses herself not as an act of defiance, but as an act of truth. She shows that independence is not loneliness, that solitude is not emptiness, that self-love is not selfishness, that rising alone is not a tragedy. She begins to understand that her journey is not about proving anything to the world. It is simply about becoming the woman she was always meant to be. A woman rooted in her worth. A woman grounded in her dignity. A woman who knows that she is allowed to take charge of her destiny without hesitation. A woman who understands that she is her own home, her own anchor, her own guide. And as she steps fully into this truth, she realizes that she has not lost anything by standing alone. She has gained everything that matters. Her journey becomes not just a path she walks, but a testament carved into her spirit, a testament that speaks without needing permission, a testament that whispers to every woman who has ever doubted her own strength that she too can rise, she too can flourish, she too can shine, without waiting for someone else to tell her she is whole.